my name is Heather Hansen. I am the CEO of Advocate to Win, and for 20 years or so, I have been a trial attorney defending doctors when their patients sue them. And there's a lot of words that people use for trial attorneys. Not all of them are nice, but the nicer ones are litigator, attorney, lawyer. Counselor is a word that I've always taken very seriously because I have a psychology degree and I consider myself a counselor to my clients. But one of the words that I love for trial lawyers is advocates. We advocate for our clients, and you are an advocate as well. Anytime that you publicly support someone or something, an idea or a want or a need, you are advocating for that thing. Now I work with people to help them advocate for the things that they want and need. So sometimes that's a new job, sometimes that's a promotion, sometimes that is better boundaries in a relationship, sometimes it's to get investors for their products. And all of those times I use the tools of an advocate to help my clients advocate. Because what I always say is that facts tell, stories sell, but advocates win. In the courtroom, there are always two competing stories. The patient and her attorney have one story about what happened in the operating room or in the doctor's office or in that relationship. And we have a completely different story. And ultimately, the story that wins is the story that uses these tools in a better way, that does better job advocating. And in your situations, whether you're in sales or you're in school and you're trying to sell your story to your teacher, or you're competing with someone in a race, or you're trying to get someone to hire you or promote you, any of those times, there's often a competing story. And if you want to win, you have to advocate. So I realized that this advocacy and the idea of advocating applied outside the courtroom after an especially difficult case. I tell the story of this incident in my book, The Elegant Warrior, but now I want to tell you the rest of the story. So in this case, the patient was a young man who had cystic fibrosis, and that's a condition that causes a lot of pain. And for this man, it also caused a great deal of anxiety. His anxiety led him to have stomach aches, which led him to have more anxiety. And he was extremely, extremely nervous about the process of a court case. He claimed that my doctor had prescribed the wrong amount of medication. He told us in the complaint, the papers that he filed in the case, that he had told the doctor he was taking a certain amount of medication and that the doctor had written down the wrong amount, and as a result that he got the wrong amount of medication, which he said led to his seizure and fractures of 5 of his vertebrae. We disagreed and said that the doctor had written down exactly what the patient told her, and therefore we were going to trial. Now, before trial, we take depositions. Depositions are the opportunity for me to ask all the questions that I want to ask so that at trial, I can ask different kinds of questions. So I went to take this man's deposition. So the court reporter was there and the attorney for the patient and myself getting ready to take his deposition and ask him the questions. But he was anxious and he was having stomach problems. So he kept running to the bathroom and running back and running to the bathroom, and we couldn't do the deposition. We couldn't get through a single question. So we had to leave for the day in the hopes that we could come back a different day. We came back a few weeks later, and as we started, the same thing was happening. He kept running to the bathroom, coming back. As soon as I'd ask a question, he'd go to the bathroom again. And so finally, I bent down and looked him in the eye and said, "Sir, what can I do? How can I make this better?" And he said, "Oh, my boots are so hot and uncomfortable, and I feel like if I didn't have these boots on, I would be more comfortable and maybe be able to get through." Now, he was wearing those big yellow Timberland boots, the yellow ones with the thick laces. So I quickly got down on my hands and knees, untied his boots, and helped him take them off. And he pushed and I pulled, and we got his boots off, and we were able to go through with the deposition. We got through it. I asked all the questions that I had to ask. And about 2 years later, we were ready for trial. And when I say we were ready, we were ready. You see, I had compared what he told me in his deposition to the medical medical records and the nurses' records, and there were lots of contradictions there that led me to believe that the story that he was telling was not the true story. I had also compared his deposition with the depositions of the nurses, and there were contradictions there as well. So we were going to try this case. And as we started trial and we did our openings, it came time for him to take the stand. Now, we lawyers call the rooms where we prepare for trial war rooms, and we call the stories that we tell about trial war stories. I am a warrior. In the courtroom, it is my job to cross-examine witnesses, and sometimes I have to do that in an aggressive way. I can take the patient's story without taking their dignity, but it is my job to take the patient's story. So in this case, he was about to go on the stand. It was during the lunch break. I was writing my notes and reviewing things and getting ready for my cross-examination. And just as he was about to get up on the stand, he approached me with his mother in tow. And he said, "Mom, this is that nice lady I told you about, the one that helped me with my shoes." And the mother came over and gave me a big hug, and she said, "Thank you so much for helping my son and for giving him such kindness on such a difficult day." And then he took the stand. Now, I did what a warrior has to do, and I cross-examined him. I pointed out to the jury the areas of his deposition where his answers were inconsistent with the medical records and the nurse's notes. And I could tell that the jury was with me. Their body language was away from him and towards me. When he spoke, they shook their arm, they folded their arms like this, shook their heads no. When I spoke, they were taking notes, leaning forward, making faces that led me to believe that we were really in good shape. And when I ended my cross-examination of that patient, I knew that we had won that case. But I went to my car that day and I cried. Because who was I? Was I this compassionate, elegant woman who got down on her hands and knees to help a man in pain? Or was I the challenging warrior who cross-examined him with everything that I had? And who did I want to be? That story was the inspiration for my book, The Elegant Warrior. But the story that I don't tell in the book is that I also questioned, who did I want to become? Did I want to spend a life where I would continue to have to go to war almost every day? Or did I want to do something different? And if I wanted to do something different, how could I do that? And it turned out I did want to do something different. I wanted to start my own business and coach and consult with clients on how they could advocate for themselves and their ideas. I wanted to write a book. I wanted that book to be a bestseller. I wanted to start a podcast. I wanted to go on television. I had all of these big dreams that I wanted to achieve. And I realized that the only way that I was going to be able to get any of those things was if I started advocating for myself. I had to start doing all of the things that I did for my clients and step up and do them for myself. And so I did. I took the tools that I used in the courtroom and combined them with my psychology degree in college and all of the books I've read on communication and public speaking and psychology and spirituality. And I combined them all, and I did all of those things. I wrote The Elegant Warrior, and it was a bestseller. I started a podcast called The Elegant Warrior, which still goes on today. I became an anchor at the Law and Crime Network that Dan Abrams runs. It's sort of like a streaming court TV. I moved to New York City, which was also a dream. And I did all of those things because I started advocating for myself. And I want you to do the same. Now, I believe there are 10 main tools of an advocate, and I can go through them with you. They are, in no particular order: elegance, words are a big one. Perspective is a big one as well. Reception, the way that you receive body language and tone of voice and all of those things. Presentation, the way that you present yourself in the courtroom or in life or in a negotiation. Negotiation is another. Credibility is another. Argument is another. But today with you and during our time together, I want to focus on two of the main tools of an advocate. But before we get there, I want to talk to you a little bit about juries. Now, in the courtroom, I have a jury, right? That's the 12 people who are sitting in the jury box that I have to influence and persuade in order to get what I want. but you have your jury too. If you are in sales, your jury is your customer. If you are in consulting, your jury is your clients. If you're trying to get investments, your jury is your investors. If you're a student, your jury might be your teachers. If you're a teacher, your jury is going to be your students. And your jury changes day to day and moment to moment. Right now, in this moment, you are my jury. But in the background, for every single one of us, at every moment of the day, we also have a jury of voices in our heads. And we have to influence and persuade that jury as well. When we do so effectively, we have more confidence to argue and negotiate and present and to build our credibility and to use evidence. So you want to apply these tools that I'm going to talk about in our time together today, not only with your clients or your customers or your teachers or your students, but also with that jury of voices inside your head. You want to talk to yourself in a way that's going to help you to influence and persuade the voices that are telling you that you're not good enough, or that you can't do this thing, or that you're an imposter, or you need more training, or you need more work, all of those voices that hold you back. So the two tools that I want to focus on today are perspective and credibility. Because to tell you the truth, they're actually my favorite. And I think perspective is probably one of the most important tools. As perspective is the way that you see the world. I believe that it truly is a maxim that what you see is what you get. Because I believe that what you see, the way that you see a situation, the way that you see the world, influences how you think, which influences how you feel, and then how you act, and then what you get. So you want to change perspectives when you're advocating. And oftentimes that starts with yourself, how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see a certain interaction or something that you have to deal with in a day will impact how you think about it, how you feel about it, how you act, and ultimately what you get. So with my coaching clients, we work really hard on practicing seeing things from other people's perspective. And I have a ton of exercises that we do together in order to start to see things from others' perspectives. When I was 18 years old, I lost about 100 pounds over the course of a year and a half or so. And I did that in large part because I started seeing my body and the way that I ate and the way that I worked out from a different perspective. So this is really valuable, not only when you're trying to change the perspectives of the people around you, but when you're trying to change your own perspective as well. So I'd like to share with you just one of those exercises that I do with my clients that helps them to see things from another perspective. And we call this the rosebud thorn exercise. So I ask them to take a situation that is either very good, or oftentimes we're working with something that is disappointing or discouraging or frustrating. So an example of something that is all of those things is this pandemic. And you look at that thing, let's use the pandemic as an example, and you say, okay, what's the thorn in that thing? And you look at it from that perspective. Well, it's easy with the pandemic, right? The thorns are all over the place. The thorn is that I haven't seen my friends for a long time, and I haven't seen my family for a long time. And 5 of my keynote speeches were canceled or postponed or brought to video because of the pandemic. People are losing money. People are obviously very sick. I mean, there are so many thorns in the pandemic that sometimes it's hard to see it from any other perspective. But then I can look at the pandemic and say, okay, where's the bud? What is here that will one day in a month or 2 months or 3 months blossom into something beautiful? And for me, there's a couple things there. One is that I'm working on my next book, and that book is due to my editor in June. So it will blossom into the next version by June, and that is a bud. Another is that I have decided to create an online course because I have so many coaching clients, I can't get to them all. And so this online course is going to help people to advocate for themselves and their ideas. And that will probably start to come to fruition sometime around July or August. So that is another bud. But then I have to see a rose. And finding a rose in the pandemic was really hard for me. And it's very hard for a lot of my clients. And the answer for these things is going to be different for each one of you. Now, for me, after a lot of thinking about it and looking at it and sort of playing with it in my mind, which is what you need to do to change perspectives, I was able to see that the rose in the pandemic for me is clarity. First of all, and one of the most wonderful things about the pandemic is we see that our water and our air is more clear because of less pollution and transportation and people going to work. And so we've heard all the stories of animals coming back and the ozone perhaps getting clearer and all of the things about the environment being a little bit more clear. But I also was able to find some more clarity in my work and get more focus on exactly how I want to serve the people who need to learn to advocate for themselves, and how important it was for me to do that, and how much passion I have for the opportunity to change the way that people ask for what they want so that they actually can get it. So by looking at that thing, I was able to see it from a different perspective. And then it became, I could see a rose, I could see the bud, and I could see the thorn. So I challenge you to do that as well. When you are looking at any situation, a bad day, a bad moment in the day, the more specific that you can get, the better. And really try to look and say, okay, what was the thorn? What was the bud? And what was the rose? Now, it might be something really awesome as well. It could be a huge surprise or a promotion or a raise or a proposal. Anything positive, you could also work on this and do this exercise to look for the thorn in the thing. It's not as much fun, but it's a great opportunity to practice seeing things from other perspectives. Another opportunity that I had to do that was in my television work. When I first started doing television, it was legal analysis for CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and CBS and NBC. And in those situations, the producers would often say, can you take either side of this argument? And as a lawyer, part of my job is to see both sides of an argument. And so in order to do that, I had to really weigh both sides of the argument. And that too has made me a better advocate for myself, for my ideas, for my checkbook, and for the things that I want. It also really helps to be able to see other people's perspectives. Because when you do, you can be more creative in finding solutions. And let me give you another example from the courtroom. This was a case that involved a nerve injury after shoulder surgery. And the patient's name was Mrs. Hernandez, and she was from Cuba. And she spoke very, very, very little English. So for the trial, she had a translator who came with her to court every day. And years before the care at issue, her husband and her daughter had passed away. And so Mrs. Hernandez lived by herself in a small apartment in Philadelphia, and she didn't work and she didn't get out of the house much. And because she didn't speak a lot of English, she didn't interact with people very much either. And during the trial, we went to the courtroom every day, and I'm always the first person to arrive in the courtroom. And she would come in with her translator, chatting as fast as can be in Spanish, which I don't understand at all, but with a big grin on her face. And over the course of the day, she would chat with her lawyer through the translator, and she would chat with me with my minimal Spanish and her minimal English. And she would watch the trial with rapt attention. And at the end of the case, the jury went to deliberate, and they came back and they were hung. That means they couldn't come to a decision. They couldn't decide. And so we had to end the case without a verdict. But the jury wanted to talk to the lawyers, and we went back to talk to them, and they said they were really split down the middle. We have to get 10 of our 12 jurors to agree, and they were 7 of them agreed with my side and 5 agreed with the other side. And that meant that there was risk on both sides. So I spoke to my doctor that I represented, and I spoke to my insurance company, and we decided to make an offer to try to resolve the case. And we offered it to Mrs. Hernandez's attorney, and he definitely liked the offer. I could tell again by his body language and his tone of voice and his facial expressions. And he went to Mrs. Hernandez, and she said no. She didn't counter. She didn't say, well, I would settle for this. She just said, nope, not interested. And that meant that we were going to have to go back to trial again. And she knew that meant we were going to have to go back to trial again. And so her attorney was a little frustrated, and we went and talked to the judge, and the judge called Mrs. Hernandez in and said, you know, you really should consider and maybe ask for some more, but this is worth a conversation. Mrs. Hernandez said, nope, not interested. So we tried the case again. And during the second trial, I watched Mrs. Hernandez, and it became really clear to me that she loved the trial. She loved the opportunity to talk to people all day long. She loved the opportunity to leave her house and get out and interact. She loved the drama of the cross-examination and the direct examination. She loved being intellectually stimulated by everything that was going on in the courtroom. And I realized that if we had seen things from Mrs. Hernandez's perspective, we would have realized that we were never going to settle the case, at least not the way that we tried to settle it. There are other things perhaps we could have done. Maybe her attorney could have worked something out that the translator could take her out one day a week with some of the money that they received from a settlement. Or maybe we could have talked about getting her involved in some community events for people who are immigrants from an area close to hers. There were all kinds of creative ways that we could have thought of if we had seen things from Mrs. Hernandez's perspective, but we didn't. And at the end of the case, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, and they came back and returned a verdict for my doctor. And I looked over at Mrs. Hernandez, and she was smiling ear to ear. So I think for her, she saw that as a win, because she had the opportunity to spend that time doing something that she really enjoyed. Now that's a different perspective, and one that's difficult sometimes for lawyers to wrap their head around. But for you, if you can start seeing things from other people's perspective, then you can change it. You can't change someone's perspective until you know it. And it's so valuable to get to know it. You can do that with your imagination and try to imagine what it must be like to be that person. You know, we talk a lot about empathy these days, and empathy is the idea that you can feel what other people feel. I'm not the hugest fan of empathy. I think that if someone else is angry and I feel their anger, it might paralyze me and make me less effective. If someone else is frustrated or sad or terrified or discouraged, feeling that way isn't going to allow me to help them. But seeing things from their perspective just might. I have one more story that might help you get a sense of the value of seeing things from other people's perspectives. I'm also trained as a mediator. A mediator will try to help resolve conflict. So sometimes I help people to settle cases. Sometimes I help people to resolve fights. And I do that by going back and forth between the two sides and trying to find each side's perspective and where they could meet in the middle. There's a great story that you learn in mediation training that really talks about perspective. And this is a story where two sides were fighting over an orange. And they were in this fight to the death for the orange. Both sides wanted the orange so badly. And so the mediator went into one room and tried to get him to maybe give up on the orange. And he said, no way, I'm not giving up on the orange. And he went to the other room and he said, well, maybe you could give him the orange. No way, I want the orange. And finally, at the end of the day, the mediator was exhausted. And he said to the first person, why do you want this orange so badly? And the person said, well, I am a health food person and I want the juice for the smoothies that I make for the people that I serve. And the mediator thought, interesting. And he went into the other room and he said, why do you want this orange so badly? And the man said, I am a bartender and I need the orange rinds as something to put on the glasses after I put my drinks together. So the mediator realized that the two different perspectives allowed them both to get what they wanted. But first you had to see things from each side's perspective. One good way to do that, as I've already mentioned, is using your imagination. Another even better way to do that is using another tool of an advocate, which is to ask questions. So often we assume that we know what other people see and feel and think and act, but to simply ask, what do you see? What am I missing? How do you feel? Tell me what you want me to know is extremely effective. In my book, The Elegant Warrior, I talk about a woman named Judge Aquilina. Judge Aquilina was the judge in the Larry Nassar case. Larry Nassar was that doctor who was accused of molesting all of those women in the gymnast, that whole terrible tragedy situation. And Judge Aquilina was the judge who listened to the women as they came forward and testified. Now, I was an anchor at the Law and Crime Network for that hearing, so I sat and listened to the whole thing. And I knew that at the beginning of the hearing, only, if I remember my numbers correctly, very few women planned to come forward and testify. And the majority of them did not intend to use their names. And by the end of the hearing, hundreds, over 100 women had come forward and testified, and the majority of them had used their names. And I attributed that to one question that Judge Aquilina asked of those women. And I interviewed her for my book about it, and I also had her on my podcast about it. She did not say to those women, "What happened to you?" She didn't say, "Tell me what I need to know." She didn't say, "Tell me what happened." She said, "Tell me what you want me to know. Tell me what you want me to know." She opened it up to see things from their perspective. She gave them the control. She gave them the power. And in doing so, she changed everything. So as an advocate, when you're advocating for yourself, remember, you always have the power to change your own perspective and to see things a little differently. And that might change how you think, how you feel, how you act, and what you get. And you also always have the power to try to see things from other people's perspectives. Because when you can do that, when you can see things from another's perspective, then you can start to change it. One last thing about this, in the courtroom, it's really, I'm at a disadvantage because every one of the jurors in every one of my cases is or has been a patient. So they automatically see things from a patient's perspective. They don't see things from a doctor's perspective. My job is to change their perspective. So I find out as much as I can about that jury in order to find out their perspective and change it. And you want to do the same. You want to find out as much as you can about your jury of clients or customers or students or patients, whatever it is that you're doing, whoever you want to influence or persuade, find out how they see the world, because that's the only way you're going to have a chance to change it. So that's the tool of perspective. I think it's so valuable, both with the jury of voices inside your own head and the jury that you will face out there in the world. Then the next tool is credibility. Credibility is so important in my cases. If my juries don't find me and my client credible, we cannot win. Full stop. End of story. And as an advocate, another tool of an advocate is words. And I'm very interested in what words really mean so that I can use them as effectively as possible. So I looked up that word credibility early in my career and recognized that it comes from the root that means to believe. You have got to be found credible. You have got to believe. You can't advocate until you believe. So you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in your story. You've got to believe in the thing that you are advocating for before you can start advocating to win. And when you really believe and you do it really effectively, sometimes you become such a good advocate that you turn the people around you into your advocates as well, because they believe just as strongly as you do. I believe that credibility comes before trust, and it comes before confidence. You have got to believe in yourself before you can trust yourself. You've got to believe in yourself before you can have confidence in yourself. And the ways that you build credibility are multifold. I work with my clients in all kinds of ways that they can build credibility, but I wanted to give you just a few here today. One way is to make promises and keep them. So that's something I do oftentimes in the courtroom. During my openings, I will often make promises to the jury. But when I do so, I have to be really sure that I can keep my promises, because if I don't, I risk losing huge amounts of credibility. You too have the opportunity to make promises and keep them. If you promise to have something done by a certain day, keep that promise. If you promise to get something in at a certain price, keep that promise. If you promise that your mom that you're going to do the dishes, keep that promise, because that will help you to build credibility. The next piece is to, if you're going to set expectations, to meet them. And that's a little bit different. Oftentimes we set expectations and meet them with our actions. So I set the expectation that I'm always going to be on time at trial, and then I meet that expectation. And with the jury, I set the expectation that I'm always going to act professionally and treat everyone, including opposing counsel and the patient who has sued my doctor, with the utmost respect and dignity. And it's my job to meet that expectation day after day, at moment after moment, and action after action. It means that even if I'm in a bad mood, I can't attack or lash out. It means that even if I am stressed out in the morning and running around, I need to do my best to get there on time, because I don't want to lose credibility with my jury. And you don't want to lose credibility with your jury as well. I promise you that it is much easier to advocate for what you want and get it if the people you're advocating to, if the people that you're asking find you credible. And that includes yourself. You know, when I lost that weight years ago, I set myself certain expectations. I will get up at a certain hour. I will work out a certain number of days a week. I will eat certain things on certain days. And I met those expectations. And I made myself some promises and I kept them. And I built my own credibility so that I could believe myself, which helped me to advocate for myself when I wanted to write that book and get on television and start my podcast and all of those things. But there's a secret to building credibility that's sort of interesting, and that's this. When you can't meet the expectations that you've set for yourself, when you can't keep the promises that you've made to your jury of clients or customers or friends or family, when you can't, you have to own it. Owning it is so difficult. Owning it is saying, I didn't keep my promise and I'm sorry. I didn't meet the expectation that I set and I'm sorry. And this is why, and this is how I plan to fix it. It is so uncomfortable. It is so difficult, but it is so powerful. And if you're able to own it on those rare occasions when you can't meet expectations and keep promises, if you're able to own it and fix it, your credibility will build so quickly and so effectively with your jury. You know, for 20 years, I've represented doctors when they've been sued, and I've built these wonderful relationships with these doctors. And I've had doctors who have called me and said, we just had a surgery and the patient had a complication, or something happened overnight to this patient. And I always tell them, you have got to go in and speak to the patient and their family. You've got to own what happened, because that is the best way to build relationships, to build credibility, and ultimately to find a solution that works for everybody. Now, a lot of times when I talk about credibility, different issues that are sort of popular right now come up, and one of them is vulnerability. I love Brené Brown. I have the utmost respect for her, but when it comes to workplace relationships, I don't think we should be so focused on vulnerability. Again, I go back to the meaning of that word. And the root of the word vulnerability is open to being wounded. Now, even if you feel open to being wounded at work or with your boss or with your teammates, I don't know that it is the most effective way to approach the relationship. I think credibility has to come first. Credibility is that owning it piece. And yes, that does feel vulnerable sometimes, but the owning it is how you build that credibility. The other word that comes up a lot with my clients is authenticity. Well, shouldn't I be authentic? Now listen, if we were always authentic in the courtroom, things would be very different. My doctors often authentically want to punch the plaintiff's attorney in the face. My doctors often authentically feel like they're going to throw up on the days that they're going to be cross-examined. My doctors often authentically don't want to be there at all. But if they said any of those things to the jury, it probably wouldn't go super well for us. So I urge my clients, both in the courtroom and in my coaching and consulting, to aim for aspirational authenticity. Don't be authentic about how you truly feel. Be authentic about how you want to feel, how the best part of you felt, how the best part of you would feel in this situation, how you want to be. And that too will help you to build credibility. The last piece of credibility that I wanted to share has to do with being the same on the outside and who you are as on the inside, and allowing, one of the phrases I often use is, does your video match your audio? Does your body language and your tone of voice and all of that match what's coming out of your mouth and the way that you present yourself? And a great example of this is two different cases that I had. So I had one case where I was preparing a doctor who was going to testify at trial in his own case. It was a surgical case. And this doctor was not going to be super likable by the jury. He was a little bit arrogant. He was a little bit frustrating. And I knew that the jury was going to have a difficult time connecting with him. I worked really hard to prepare this doctor to testify, and after days and days and weeks of preparing, I knew there was only so much I could do. And this doctor was going to do his best, and we'll see what happens. And the night before he was going to testify, it was like 1 in the morning, we were still prepping in the conference room, and I said, "Doctor, you know what, go home, get a good night's sleep in the hours that we have left, and I'll see you in the courtroom tomorrow." And as we were packing up, he looked at me and he said, "Heather, should I cry?" And I said, "No, doctor, I don't think you should cry." Because I knew that if he cried on purpose, the jury would see that. They would sense that. They would know that he was not being honest and true and real. And they would not like him for it. He cried at trial, and we lost that case. Now, another example, though, was a doctor who I represented who was an obstetrician. So she delivered a baby, and the baby ended up having brain damage. It was a very sad case, but we knew that the doctor had done everything right. She had done everything that she was supposed to do in the case. And so I prepared her for her testimony, and at the end of the night, I knew that she was ready, and it was about 4 o'clock. I said, "Doctor, go home, be with your family. Try not to think about this too much tonight. Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine tomorrow. I'll see you in the courtroom." And that night she called me up, and she had a couple questions, and then at the end of our conversation, she said, "Heather, what if I cry?" And I said, "Doctor, if you cry, it's going to be okay," because I knew if she cried, the jury would see that. Their perspective would be that it was out of sympathy and sadness and empathy for the patient, and that it would be okay because it was credible, it was real. And she did cry, and it was okay, and we won that case. Credibility is such an important piece of advocating because it comes down to what you believe. If you believe in what you're asking for, if you believe in what you're advocating for, and if you believe that you have everything you need to do so, you will be a much better advocate. So I hope that this has been helpful to you in seeing that there is no one better to advocate for you than you are. No one has the passion and the talent and the experience and the heart, all of the things that have brought you here, have given you what you need to be your own best advocate. All you have to do is take these tools and apply them, see things from a different perspective, build your credibility, use evidence, negotiate, all of the things that I work with on my clients, but specifically what we've talked about today. And you can advocate for what you want and what you need, and you can get it. I would love to hear about how well you've done, what you're advocating for, what you're getting. If you want to email me and ask me any questions or let me know about your advocating, I'd love to hear from you. My email is heather@advocatetowin.com. I am happy to answer any questions if we have them. I know Deborah, I can look too on the, see if there's any chat questions. But I was happy to be with you here today, and I'm excited to hear about all the things that you're out there advocating for.
I think we are all set with chats. I do see some folks on the live stream, but I haven't seen a chat request for a comment, but if one comes in shortly, I'll go ahead and ask it.
Great.
This was great. I really learned a lot. I have to tell you that I saw things from a new perspective, thanks to
All
you.
right, that's my job, right? If I can help people see things from a different perspective, I'm advocating.
Absolutely. I really did learn a lot, and I have a feeling everyone else did too. So I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate everything today.
Oh, it truly is my pleasure, and I truly do welcome any emails, questions, comments. That's what I'm here for.